Hello, everyone. Today is April 26th, 2020. We are continuing to stay at home, to stay safe during this coronavirus lockdown. But I do just want to say that I really miss you all. I can't wait until we're able to come back together safely in person and gather and worship as a body. But for now, we are continuing to worship and fellowship online, virtually. And so just thank you for joining us today. Last week, Pastor Michael brought us through the first 11 verses of the book of Habakkuk. This is a new series that we are starting. And just as a bit of a recap, last week we were asking the question, how long? How long, Lord? How long would God let Judah slip into immorality? How long would he allow violence and wickedness to prevail in the nation? How long? Yeah, as we know, after the reigns of David and Solomon, Israel became progressively more and more wicked. And there was idolatry, there was intermarrying, there was just injustice in the streets. All the things that God had set out for them in the law of Moses, they had ignored. In a nutshell, they had broken their covenant. And sure, there were a couple of bright spots, such as the reforms of King Josiah. But for the most part, the leaders had led the nation into moral and spiritual ruin. And the prophet Habakkuk, he's prophesying, he's active during the reign of King Jehoiakim. And he's looking around and he's watching all this and he's seeing all this sin around him and he's lamenting, right? He's lamenting, how long, O Lord? I mean, how much longer must we suffer this sinfulness? Aren't you going to do something, God? And last week in Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 6, we heard God's reply. He said, yes, I am going to do something. I am going to do something so scandalous that everyone, you're barely going to believe it. I am raising up the Babylonians. Right? I'm raising up the Babylonians, and they will be my instrument of judgment. And so today's message, today's passage is a continuation of last week. And Habakkuk, he hears God's response, right? That God is going to raise up the Babylonians. And Habakkuk basically says, whoa, wait a second. The Babylonians, those guys, they're vicious. They're vile. They're immoral. They're worse than we ever were. Why would you use them as your instruments of justice, Lord? How come, God? How come you're going to use them? I mean, that just seems so wrong to use the Babylonians. Send us a drought. Send us famine. Send us a plague, a disease. But the Babylonians? Really, God? How come? So let's take a look at our passage today together. Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 12 through 17. Verse 12. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as judgment, and you, O Rock, have established them as reproof. So here Habakkuk understands that God is sending the Babylonians as a judgment, right? As a reproof. This is discipline. A good father will discipline his children. And Habakkuk confesses, you know what? Yeah, we deserve to be disciplined. We deserve to be punished. We messed up. We have broken faith. We have strayed from your ways. We deserve to be punished. But even so, Habakkuk understands that there are limits. There are limits to punishment. Right? He interjects. He says, we shall not die. Our God, he will not wipe us out. He loves us. He has an everlasting covenant with us. There are limits to punishment, to judgment. We deserve to be punished, but there's got to be some limits there. We may suffer, but we will not die. Okay. Yes, we are being punished, but it's for our own good, within limits. You know, one of the most difficult things about being a father, a parent, is learning how to discipline your children in a fair and consistent way. I mean, children need to know clearly why they are being punished and with what they are being punished. Otherwise, they will just learn to hate the punishment and the punisher. Right? They need to clearly know why. What did they do that was wrong? And what? What are the limits? What are the bounds of that punishment? How long is it going to last? How much is it going to hurt? Right? They need to know the limits. And Habakkuk here, he clearly understands why. But he questions the what, the method. Does this punishment befit the crime? You who are of pure eyes, that can see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? So here Habakkuk wonders aloud, God, you are so holy and pure, and you cannot even bear to look on evil. Then why would you use evil men to do your will? These Babylonians, you see them, what they're capable of, the atrocities that they've committed, the immorality that they practice. Why in God's name would you use them? Right? How come? It doesn't make sense. In Habakkuk's mind, it just doesn't make any sense. Why punish evil with evil? I mean, that would be like treating a paper cut with amputation, right? It's just so far beyond the limits of what the circumstances call for. And Habakkuk, he cannot help but question God. How come? How is this justice? How is this fair? How is this right? How come you use the wicked to punish wickedness? And you stand idly by, you let this happen without a word. How come? How come, Lord? How come? My first point today is this. We are in no position to judge. I mean, who are we to judge others, calling them wicked and declaring ourselves righteous? I mean, who are we to point fingers and say that they don't deserve God's mercy and we do? What gives us that right? Because if anything, believers are more guilty than non-believers. Believe it or not. Because we have God's law. We know when we've sinned. They don't. So who are we to judge our fellow man when they're simply living out their natural lives from their own worldly perspective? Yes, the Babylonians were militaristic and opportunistic and pagan. But did they know any better? Do the Christians around us, do the non-Christians around us deserve any worse than us? I mean, who are we to judge others? And secondly, who are we to judge the judge? I mean, the sovereign Lord who ordains all things. Who are we to tell him? Who are we to tell God, this punishment is too much. You've gone too far. All right, God knows what he's doing. We have to trust him. We have to trust him. Would you refuse cancer treatment because the doctor warns you of the side effects? Sure, you may lose your hair. Yes, it's going to be painful. You will suffer. You will suffer. But that chemotherapy is also going to get down to the very root of the cancer and kill it. The treatment is going to kill the cancer before it kills you. Who are you to judge the doctor? So who are we to judge the one who has ordained our treatment, our punishment? Who are we to question God's methods, whether it's the Babylonians or cancer or COVID-19 that is sent to root out the sin in our lives and to make us more like Jesus Christ? Who are we to judge and to say no? Verse 14, you make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet. So he rejoices and is glad. So here Habakkuk uses the metaphor of fishing and hunting, and he likens the nations of the earth to the fish of the sea or the animals of the land. And in verse 15, he's referring to Babylon. Babylon, he captures them in his hooks and his nets. Babylon rose from within the Assyrian Empire, and eventually they conquered it, and eventually they even conquered all the surrounding nations. Right? And Babylon became the dominant superpower of the ancient world during the time under King Nebuchadnezzar. This is around 600 BC. And Babylon controlled most of the civilized world. And there was really no one who could challenge them, not even the mighty Egypt. And Habakkuk says, he has conquered all these other nations. He's dragged them up. And he rejoices and is glad. He rejoices and is glad. Babylon thinks that the gods have smiled on them. Verse 16, therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet. For by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. The Babylonians worshipped their strength. This was literally true. They made sacrifices and offerings to their pagan gods of war because they felt like these gods gave them victory. Babylon felt like they were the ones that had brought about their own success. They thought that it was through their military might that they had achieved greatness. Just as centuries before, those who built the Tower of Babel thought that it was their human ingenuity that had made themselves a great name. Fame, strength, wealth, power, influence, these are your gods, they declared. These are your gods. So a little fun fact, the Hebrew word for Babel, like in the Tower of Babel, is the same word that is used for Babylon. And much later in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, we see that Babylon becomes the embodiment of the prideful human spirit that raises itself up by pushing down others. Right? Babylon says, we are great. Bow at our might. That's what Babylon represents and symbolizes. This spirit of pridefulness, of making ourselves great by pushing others down. Verse 17, is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? Habakkuk ends this chapter with a couple of troubling questions. How come the powerful do what they want? How come they get to operate unchecked? Is there anyone ever going to stop them? How come this happens, this exists? And humanly speaking, it seems like the powerful, the mighty, the strong, they are a law unto themselves. Right? We look around us and we see it every day. It seems like the strong, the rich, the famous, they get to do whatever they want and get away with it. But the point that Habakkuk wants us to see is this. The strong, they worship their strength, but it is a false idol. It is a false idol. God is the one who is actually in control. You know, it may seem like those with power, they have this authority, but in reality, it is a derived authority. God has the ultimate authority. God gives certain people power, but it is a derived authority. And those who misuse their power will have to answer to God. You know, I was bullied back in middle school. I was the sole scrawny Asian kid in my class. And there were kids that were bigger than me. They were stronger than me. They would pick on me and make fun of me. And there was one kid in particular, who would shove me and he would call me names all the time, kind of racist names, and he would make my life miserable. And yeah, you know what? I still remember his name. 30-some years later, I still remember him. By the way, Corey Klein, I forgive you. But yeah, I remember going to school and my days were spent trying to avoid these bullies, these kids. I would try to avoid them in the hallway. I would duck into classrooms as quickly as I could. And I was bullied for being different, for being unathletic, for being smart. I was bullied. And you know, as I read the Bible all these years later, I've come to this conclusion, this conviction, that God hates bullies. Because God hates oppression. God hates oppressors of any kind, whether they are bullies in school or they are bosses taking advantage of their employees, or abusive husbands, abusive fathers and parents, or nations who have more wealth and military power. God despises oppression. God despises oppression because it goes against God's very character. God is the God of justice. And this idea that might makes right, that the power that we have is ours to possess and ours to use for our own purposes, it runs counter to everything that God has created us to be and God has called us to do. I mean, we're supposed to be good neighbors. We're supposed to love our enemies. We're supposed to humble ourselves and serve one another. And bullying and oppressing and abuse, that's the exact opposite of who we're supposed to be. Oppression, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, whether it's personal or national. It's the exact opposite of what we're supposed to do. Raising yourself up by pushing others down, that is the very spirit of the Antichrist. It is the opposite of Jesus. It is the opposite of Jesus. So how come? How come God allows this to happen? How come children are bullied? How come nations war against nations? How come the rich and the influential take advantage of the poor and the helpless? How come? And we don't know. We don't know why God allows evil. Why sin sometimes brings success. We don't know how come. We can only lament. Right, along with the prophet, we can lament. How long, O Lord? How long is this going to last? How come, oh God? How come? It just seems so unfair. And as Pastor Michael reminded us last week, it is okay to lament. It is good to grieve. But it must be done in faith. Trusting that God is allowing this suffering for a reason. And he will bring something beautiful out of it. Though Habakkuk struggles with the question, how come God is using Babylon, that evil and wicked nation? In hindsight, we see that the conquest, the exile, not only punished sin, it also refined the faithful. If God had allowed Israel to continue down the path that they were going, they may have been beyond saving. Like when cancer spreads uncontrollably to the point that it becomes terminal and there's nothing else that you can do. There's no cure. God did something. God used very drastic measures, yes. Very painful measures, yes. But God did something, and he bought his people precious time until the cure could arrive 500 years later. The cure. I am, as surely as you all are, struggling to see this coronavirus pandemic through the eyes of faith. What good is God bringing out of this? And as far as this passage is concerned, this virus is reminding us that our strength, our wealth, cannot save us. Right? The virus doesn't care if you're a rich Wall Street executive or you're a grocery store cashier. It doesn't care if you're the United States of America or some third world country. Right? This can't save us. This is not going to save us, no matter how much of this we have. This cannot save us. We need to look closer. We have to focus on this. In God we trust. In God we trust. We have to focus. COVID-19 is teaching us that we do need to trust in God and not in our wealth. Secondly, this virus is teaching us, well, it's teaching me at least, to be patient, to be humble. We often ask God for patience and humility. But he doesn't just snap his fingers and magically change our hearts. No, he brings us through trials, through hardships, through suffering. And then he grows our patience and our humility. It grows. It has to grow. It's not just overnight and it just happens. No, it has to be grown. And so if there's something to be learned here, I think it's this. We should be using this time as an opportunity to grow mindfulness and patience. We should be using this time as an opportunity to practice patience and perseverance. I know it's hard. It's frustrating. We just want things to go back to normal, right? But let's allow God to make the most of this, to make the most of us. God is doing something. Our suffering is not in vain. Take care, everybody. I really miss you. We'll see each other soon, but please stay safe, stay healthy. God bless. I'll see you.